Nystrom, and this is my POL. One of the most incredible things about human beings is our ability to believe in a common myth. No other species can believe in something we can't see, but we can. We do it every day. The concepts of democracy, laws, human rights, currency, they're all man-made myths. Money only exists because we believe it has value. Human rights only exist because we believe that people deserve a certain standard. And these common myths can be a wonderful thing. They allow humans to live together in numbers that other species can't. They allow people to come together for civil rights movements, for religion, for their towns and their communities. They allow us to travel the world and to make connections with people we've never met. But they've also caused us some problems. Racism, sexism, any form of discrimination is formed from these myths. From the belief that one group of people is better than another. The way we destroy our planet is the cause of the myth. The belief that humans are better than any other species, and therefore we can do what we like with our planet. Gender stereotypes, social status, the boundaries between countries, our culture perpetuates these myths. Through what our parents tell us, what our teachers tell us, and from what we see on TV and other media. Our culture is constantly telling us who we are in relationship to the world, but it's our job to combat that. To find the truth by asking the right questions. On this trip, I've learned to question what society is telling me to see, and to ask questions that go against the status quo. And this wasn't easy to learn. Before this trip, my brain had become desensitized to the world around me. Growing up, I, like so many others, had lost the ability to think critically. And the worst thing is, no one told me it's wrong. In fact, people tell you it's right. It happens all the time at school. Teachers ask us to give tidy, smart-sounding answers that will fit nicely into a standardized test. So I learned to BS learning, to make major assumptions that as long as they sounded smart and fit in with what the teacher wanted, would give me a good grade. And I did it all the time, most times without realizing it. At orientation in Guatemala, we were asked to make video self-interviews, and we just watched them earlier this week. And then we answered a list of abstract, complex questions about sustainable agriculture, education, public health, and about ourselves. And at that point, I didn't know any of the answers. And that was perfectly okay, but you wouldn't know it from the video. Throughout the entire time, and it was over 10 minutes, I didn't ask a single question. I didn't admit once that I didn't know what I was talking about. And because I did that, my learning stopped right there. I wasn't speaking from experience or knowledge or even intuition. I was just spouting BS. It was smart sounding BS, but it was still BS. If I'd stopped to ask myself why I was saying what I was saying, where my ideas were coming from, what immediate assumptions I was making when I answered these questions, it would have been a messier video, but it would have been one that showed learning and growth. One of the principles of teaching and learning that our leaders showed us early in the program is that we should strive not to have an answer for every question, but a question for every answer. Every minute of this trip was spent with that idea in mind, whether consciously or not, because we were asked to question absolutely everything. In seminars, we were asked to question a material. You can no longer give me a statistic, and I'll just simply nod my head, because I now have to wonder how the information was gathered, what the intention was of the person who gathered it, and how the questions were phrased. We were asked to question our leaders for clarification or if we wanted their feedback, their perspective, but also if we disagree with them or had feedback to give. We were asked to question each other, to notice when we were making assumptions or were looking from a biased viewpoint. And it wasn't easy, but the more I got in the habit of doing it, the more confident I became when I was speaking in seminars, and the more sure of myself I could be. When I had an opinion, I no longer worried about being proven wrong, because what is being proven wrong than being given another set of questions to ask? I found that even though I wasn't getting answers, I was gaining understanding. And with that, I was able to trust my instincts and intuition, because I was simply paying more attention and analyzing more about the world around me. I had a newfound curiosity, a love for learning, that had always been there, but had been lost in the mess of homework and tests and stress that comes along with being in school. And being able to create that space for myself to enjoy learning opened so many doors that I was, and still am, so excited to explore, but not all of them have been easy to go through. The hardest was definitely learning to question who I was as an individual, and this question manifested itself in different ways, in seminars and in personal reflection, but also in conversations I had with my friends. I one time asked my roommate Libby to psychoanalyze me because we were talking about how she was really good at understanding people. So I said, okay, do me. And she's like, no, that's not a good idea. And I pushed her, and she relented. And the first lesson I learned is to never let your friends psychoanalyze you. It's not fun. All your traits get laid out on the table in front of you, and they're scary accurate. But at the same time, Libby was able to articulate a lot of what I was struggling with throughout this trip, which is how to be myself, even if I was worried about being judged. And that led to a bit of a personal crisis, because the person I am, no matter how hard I tried, had simply not shown through for most of the trip. And it took a couple more mini crises and way too much reflecting before I had finally gotten to the point that people could see that I wasn't simply the smart, quiet, put-together girl I presented myself as. Because I've always known that's not who I was. But it took a lot of work to understand why the chatty, nerdy, and always disorganized person who I knew I was didn't match my outward appearance. When I went to Isaac for advice about this, he told me to notice when I chose not to say or do something, and to ask myself why. And this is when questioning became a part of my daily routine. When I felt upset, embarrassed, angry, annoyed, but especially when I felt like retreating into myself, rather than pushing those feelings away, or just trying to ignore them, which had been my original strategy. I started to actively notice those feelings, and to pick them up and look them all over and ask myself why, what had caused me to feel this way. Journaling became a part of this strategy. I didn't figure that one out until every time I was in a good or bad mood and talked to Corey, who's our journal fanatic and my roommate. She would ask at the end of our conversation, well, have you journaled about this yet? And then I'd roll my eyes, but also would sit down and start writing, until I got the habit of really trying to analyze and understand the interactions and emotions I had felt during the day. I got to know myself a lot better. And through that understanding, I kept coming back to one of the questions we had talked about first during orientation, which was how to be vulnerable. And you've heard about this a little bit in the other speeches, because it was a constant theme of our trip. And it wouldn't feel right for me not to talk about it, because so much of this program has put me in a place where I was expected to be vulnerable. Telling our rivers of life, being asked to have mandatory 10-minute direct communication conversations with every single member of our group, living with a family and a roommate, being expected to be honest and authentic in seminar spaces, and here doing public speaking. Through this, I've learned that vulnerability is simply being open when the safer and easier path is keeping your walls up. It's being willing to be seen, even if it means you might get judged. I'd always associated being vulnerable with being uncomfortable, and I had to ask myself why I felt like that, and what I could do to lean into that discomfort. And I learned that I wasn't great at it, that it's a skill that before this trip I hadn't even known I was supposed to be working on. And because I was thrown into a group of students that were all trying to learn, to grow, and to be open and honest and real with each other and real with themselves, I felt overwhelmed by this new idea. But that was okay, because I learned that being vulnerable is the only way to really connect with people, and that seemed worth it. I learned this from my homestay families when they opened their hearts and homes to us and let us join their family dinners. I learned it from my roommates in late night conversations, from nurses sharing how hard it was to be stationed away from home, and how they were working because they'd always dreamed of helping others. I learned it when Thai students talked to us about how they were so overwhelmed with homework and how they couldn't wait to reach high school and could grow their hair out. In Guatemala, during Sober Mesa, when we sat at the table for hours and our host parents told us about their hopes for their daughter and their gratitude for the pictures we took at our quinceañera, it was when I got to hear people's stories, whether they were good or bad, that I felt the most connected. And it was when I shared my stories back that I was able to create relationships with the people around me. And even though I'm not perfect at forming those connections, and I probably never will be, all the amazing relationships I've been able to form on this trip, especially the ones that started from a place of openness and vulnerability, are as much a sign of learning and growth as anything else I could have taken out of this trip. The more I created these connections, the more seminars we had, the more I learned and saw about the world, the more I found myself thinking back to before this trip. Because choosing a gap year, applying for TVB in particular, was rooted in this feeling I had, that I wasn't ready to go to college because there was some answer, some clear path that I was looking for and I just hadn't found yet. Because I knew that I wanted to do something important, to do something with my life that actually meant something. And now I can articulate that feeling into a question, because that abstract, what in God's name am I going to do with my life, can someone please give me an answer, feeling, was rooted in a question. I was simply trying to ask, what can I do? It's a question I've asked myself again and again on this trip, because our world's problems don't fit into neat and tidy solutions. And it was hard not to get frustrated by that, especially when we could look around and see a lot of the world's problems laid out right in front of us. In Guatemala, that looked like people burning trash, including plastic in their house. It was being catcalled and stared at every time we left our houses. In Thailand, it was seen in the way teachers only knew their students by numbers and how everyone had their faces buried in their phones. In Ghana, it was the signs of an overburdened health system that overworked and underpaid all its employees. And these problems are so frustrating because they don't have obvious solutions, and because a lot of times what we think would help does far more harm than good. One clinic we worked at used to get vaccines donated to it by the Salvation Army. Eventually, the donations moved elsewhere, and the clinic sold government-subsidized vaccines instead. But the people in the community had gotten used to getting those free vaccines, and not understanding why they suddenly had to pay for them, thought the clinic was cheating them, and refused to get vaccinated. A very simple idea that seems helpful at the time actually went against the clinic's ability to be self-sufficient. Even with good intentions, the impact isn't always positive. But that doesn't mean it can't be. No, there's no easy answer, no perfect solution. But that doesn't mean there isn't a solution to be found. And this is where so many people get pulled back into those myths that our culture tells us. The myths that individuals can't do anything. And it doesn't matter if you personally do something, don't do something, because someone else will. I'll never understand how facts can be laid out so clearly in front of us, yet we don't feel the need to do anything, because I've been there. I know that the environment is screwed, yet I still forget to bring a reusable bag when I go to the grocery store. We do little things like this all the time. We still drive around a gas car or buy from companies that are cruel to their workers or unsustainable. And the same problem goes for aid, because as a nation we invest in projects that look good or that benefit American products, and companies refuse to look at what actually would help the people and give them what they want. And I still don't know how I'm going to get around these myths. I still don't have an answer to the question, what can I do? And as much as I wanted to at the beginning of this trip, I didn't find an answer to what my life was going to look like. And I certainly still have no clue what I want to do with it. But I do know that I want to stop being passive to the problems of our world. And I think that if I take what I've learned on this trip, if I start on the foundation of asking questions and really listening to the answers, with a bit of luck, I'm sure that whatever I choose in my life, whoever I choose to be, it can't end up all that bad.
Well, first I have a statement that I always knew you were chatty, nerdy, and disorganized. So you didn't hide it from me very well. But Lily Nystrom, could you just tell me a little bit about one time when you felt like really present in a community and kind of understanding in that community the problems they were facing?
I would say that our host family in Guatemala, it was really when you got to have conversations with people, and so sober mesa is when you have dinner, and then you sit at the table for the next like 2 or 3 hours, and you're not allowed to leave the table. And so we would sit there, like dinner ended up being like a 4-hour affair. And I don't speak a ton of Spanish. Emma's Spanish is much better than mine. But we did get to have so many conversations with them about basically anything that was going on in their community. We learned a lot about like corruption in government. We learned a lot about just kind of like how they interacted with their community and what they wanted. And they talked a lot about their daughter because their daughter really wanted to be a teacher, and they didn't know how they were going to pay for her education, and they really wanted her to get there, but college is really hard to pay for, and they talked to us a lot about that. So I think just kind of always having them, and this happened at all the homestays, whenever like we really sat down with them, whether it was through dinner or just kind of at other times, and really able to have conversations with them. That was when I felt definitely the most connected to the people in the communities.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was awesome. The question of like what can I do is something that I think a lot of us, I've always struggled with it myself. Have you ever tried asking what can I do next instead of what can I do?
Yeah, I think I do tend to ask a bit too much in terms of like, oh, what should I be doing? What should I major in? Like, where should I go to college? I definitely think that the more, like on this trip, we looked a lot at kind of what the problem problems were, which was at times really difficult, but we also kind of looked a lot at like what the best ways to do things are, and I think a lot of it has to do with kind of your intention going into things and how you have to really just look at things from all sides. And I think I don't really want to think too much about what I can do next, because that's like I don't know yet, but I think it is something I've thought about a lot and then kind of want to keep thinking about. Maddie?
Hi. So you're going to college.
Yes.
So how are you going to approach, once again, meeting an entire group of people you've never met before, maybe similarly or different to what you did with TBB?
Hopefully differently than I did with TBB. I think I was very nervous coming into TBB, and because it was especially like such a small group, I very quickly tried to like analyze everybody and kind of be like friend, like maybe a friend, like not sure yet, which is not like the best way to do things. And actually, Dad told me before to leave I came on this trip to not kind of pick too soon, because you have the entire 6 months to get to know people. Don't put people in boxes right away, and I did do a great job at that. But I think because like there are so many people at the beginning of this trip that I like immediately was like, this is what this person is like, this is what this person is like, and ended up being proven just so wrong on that. I think I'll be able to kind of go into college with a better perspective, knowing that like people's first impressions are not who they are.
Really, I really appreciated all your honesty. And,
Thanks.
acknowledges that you don't have all the answers, but that you are going to be a lifelong learner and be striving for that.
Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.